The Soulsborne series is a legendary one and synonymous with great bosses with challenging difficulty, unique designs and mesmerizing lore. It's a series known for its fantastic major battles that push their titles into all-timer territory. But what about the dark corners that no one likes to admit? You know what I'm alluding to, right? The miserably unfair ganks, the uninspired lazy reskins. I'm talking about the Royal Art Vanguards, the Godskin duos. I absolutely adore the bosses in these games, but we all know that there are those that have us scratching our heads when we first fought them. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing the worst boss from every Souls game, from Demon Souls all the way to Elden Ring. So let's get this started. Starting with the eldest sibling of the series, for Demon Souls, I had to go with the Dragon God, who unfortunately feels like public enemy number one for this game. He's not the cleanest choice for the worst at the very least. I did have trouble deciding between him and the final boss of the game, True King Alon, who on my first playthrough felt like a really disappointing end to a great game. But back to the Dragon God. I've played through Demon Souls a few times now, but have never managed to enjoy any of my times with this fight. The fight in question is a much more deadlier and cinematic version of hide and seek, as you need to avoid the boss's gaze by running from pillar to pillar while he looks away. And whether you are in his vision is indicated by whether his eyes are lit red or yellow. Your goal is to get to the two glowing ballistas placed on each side of the arena to shoot and pin him down where you can finally kill him. Like a lot of the fights in Demon Souls, this boss's gimmick influences pretty much the whole encounter, resulting in a frustrating and janky battle as your real fight lies against all the rubble that you'll have to break through. A glorified stealth fight for the boss that was plastered across promotional material of the game would not have been my first guess for this guy. Even with the strategy coming down to hitting the rubble and beelining it through before his eyes turn red, which sounds very simple and easy to execute, it feels like you have a fraction of time before you're spotted, which makes it a lot more tricky for melee users especially. The fight requires you to be near perfect with your decision making and timing, because one simple mistake and the Dragon God will squash you like a damn bug against a wall. With every other boss you get better as you learn the gimmick, but with the Dragon God, even once you learn it, it's just as annoying and difficult. Next we have Dark Souls 1, and there's some discussion to be had here between a couple of horrible boss fights. Do I go with the Centipede Demon, whose atrocious arena has you fighting on a minuscule platform as his moveset consists of him fucking breakdancing whilst you try and decipher which part of the body he's about to hit you with? Another option would be the Moonlight Butterfly, as it's an extremely bland and boring encounter with a very minute moveset that has you yawning more than fighting. Then there's the Capra Demon. I've seen prison cells that give more room for people than this fight. It's just an incredibly annoying one. What with the dogs and the limited space you get to juggle everything about. But who am I kidding? Of course the worst boss was always going to be the Bed of Chaos. Although the other three are definitely bad in their own right, the Bed of Chaos is bad in just about every right. This fight is designed around needing to hit 3 weak points of this huge disfigured tree, one beneath each arm and the insect at the core, which comes last and ends the fight entirely. The first arm is a freebie and takes no time or effort to kill whatsoever. The problem arises afterwards when that first arm is defeated, because that's when the creature comes to life and the battle gets really chaotic. As you make your way to the second spot, cracks begin to appear in the ground, symbolizing the cracks in the design of this shit fight. Miyazaki, what a genius. Even when he takes an L, he converts it into a W. Okay, seriously, the cracks in this fight make it a lot more hectic, as the footing in front of you will disappear, making you play very cautiously. However, the sweeping attacks of the Bed of Chaos make you play the opposite. They make you rush. It feels cheap and somehow like a worse version of the Dragon God that we just spoke about. However, it gets worse, as after you've disposed of the second arm, all you have left is the middle. And this is where the Bed of Chaos creates a giant opening for you to dart across. A lot of people complain about this part, saying that the boss forces you to do some platforming, but honestly I've never had this problem. If you just angle yourself, you'll fall down without the need for that janky ass Dark Souls jump. It doesn't make it any less annoying though, because this is where the full force of the Bed of Chaos' sweeping attack comes through, as it feels ridiculously tough to get past. And even if you do, there's still the Fire Pillars attack that she can dish out right at the end, which can make any run end in tragedy. The one saving grace is that the boss saves the progress you make, so you don't have to do all 3 weak points in a single attempt. It's a nice touch, but it doesn't save it from being an awful encounter. I do wish they had attempted this fight in Elden Ring, perhaps as a minor boss. The addition of a proper jump button could have really made it something interesting. Moving on to Dark Souls 2, From Software gave us a total of 41 bosses to fight, so naturally there would be a few stinkers amidst the bunch. And I'm not sure if there's a general consensus with this game on who the worst boss is like the other two before it. I'm pretty sure a majority of players would say the Dragon God from Demon Souls, and I have no doubt most would say the Bed of Chaos for Dark Souls 1, but what about its sequel? Well, there are a few candidates to choose from. For one, there's the Congregation fight, a laughably easy fight that offers nothing except mildly interesting lore and free souls to the player. On the other hand, there's either of the Rat Covenant bosses, who are both terrible for totally opposite reasons. The Royal Rat Vanguard is a very bland concept, made into a really forgettable and lousy experience, and the Royal Rat Authority feels like a Sith knockoff, whose fight doesn't even hinge on the main boss, rather the shitty rats included at the beginning of the encounter. But the boss who I have an especially hard time trying to enjoy would have to be the Gang Squad from the Crown of the Sunken King DLC. I was very tempted to put Lud and Zalin in this spot for how incredibly lazy it felt to have a boss that was a reskin of a boss in the same DLC while simultaneously making it a 2v1. But it's more the runback that I find to be abysmal rather than the actual boss itself, which is still shit but not the worst. The Gang Squad, however, well, they have nothing to save themselves here. If I had to sum the fight up using a single word, it would be tedium, because oh boy is it a long and dull encounter. I'm glad Scholar of the First Sin gave the DLC for free, because I genuinely feel a little robbed if I paid money for this and one of the 3 bosses was just a trio of NPCs with boss health bars slapped on them behind a fog wall. The fight consists of you just running and running once you get a cheeky slap on one of the NPCs every now and then, until it becomes a 1v1 where you just obliterate the last of us. The last of them. The lower portion of the arena is also just a pool of water that slows you down as you try to move through it, and they just stuffed some petrification spitting statues near the end of it, as if all that other bullshit wasn't enough. I feel like this fight represents everything that's wrong with the worst bosses in the series. It's a dull and boring encounter that's beyond unbalanced, as they must have thought every single person running through these optional DLC areas were going into the bosses with other players or phantoms. A deserved spot for the Battle of the Garbage Dump in Dark Souls 2. Now let's talk about Bloodborne. In general, I'd say this game doesn't have any outlandishly horrific bosses like the ones we spoke about prior to this. However, that doesn't mean there aren't weak bosses out there in the streets of Yharnam, as my choice for the worst boss of the game has changed numerous times throughout my playthroughs. From the Witches of Hemwick, whose fight just confuses the player instead of challenging them, as the random enemies that roam about the room do more to threaten us than the witches themselves, to the Celestial Emissary, who similarly to the Prowling Magus and Congregation from Dark Souls 2 is a pathetically easy and pretty forgettable experience. However, my spot for this video goes to the first boss in the final area of the base game, Mikolash, host of the Nightmare. Another boss that suffers from a lot of tedium as you're forced to make a run through Mikolash's damn house party, each attempt if you die. From the start, your goal is to drive him into a specific part of the arena. It's a finicky process where you're made to chase after him like a creep until you corner him in a room where you fight to the death, and then, oh wait, he just disappears. And then you have to repeat the steps all over again for his second phase. Not only that, except it's just worse now. The house party is now a house of horrors with random turns that can divert you from your original goal of tracking this annoying fuck down. This makes chasing down Mikolash in the second phase incredibly more annoying. But let's just talk about the fighting portion. Yes, crap, this guy has one fucking attack in the first phase. What the hell kind of a joke is that? It's deadly if it connects, but very easy to strafe around, making that first phase a pushover. However, the second phase, my goodness, it's a nightmare, with a few additional moves, but the most devastating being his ability to use a Call Beyond. This spell is an absolute bitch and can end even the most optimal of runs in a single second. Even if you manage to dodge it the first time, he can just keep spamming it. Momentum is everything. You better keep beating his ass without stopping, otherwise it can very well be game over. Such a bullshit spell and a bullshit way to end an attempt. If this wasn't even in the fight, I'd have chosen something else for this spot. Also, the fact that a large fraction of this fight is not even fighting the boss but just running after it is just so monotonous and makes it torture on subsequent playthroughs and speedruns especially. Moving on to Dark Souls 3, we have a case pretty similar to that of Bloodborne. This game definitely has some weaker bosses, but not any that are distinctly offbeat. While siphoning through the game's great roster of bosses, I struggle to choose which boss I liked the least. I find that most of these fights have some pretty likable qualities to them at least. I initially considered going for the Curse-Rotted Greatwood due to his grotesque design and finicky mechanics that can sometimes wreck my poor console frame rate. I also thought about High Lord Walnir and the Ancient Dragon, two gimmick fights that come with a few annoying kinks, but are easy enough that I'm feeling lenient to let them go in today's list. The spot for Dark Souls 3 can change on any given day, but for now I'm giving it to another DLC boss. This time, Half-Light, Spear of the Church. Man, does this fight suck. You have to listen to Argo's entire speech every attempt you have at this fight, or waste effort beating him down, because for some reason you can't skip his dialogue. I guess it's for online purposes to load in the player, which I'll speak about in a bit, but damn. If you remember the old monk from Demon Souls, then you'll be familiar with how this fight works, as it changes depending on whether you are offline or online. If you are connected to the servers, then you're matched against another random player, which means the fight itself can vary depending on their skill level. But I usually do the offline version, meaning I go up against a glorified NPC enemy. The NPC is pretty cracked and can punish roll spam and general poor skills from the player. An okay fight, but I take more issue with Argo summoning a fucking painted guardian to make it a gank. Like, bro, you're dead, how is he still being summoned? It can make the fight borderline insufferable with the combination of two annoying enemies together. Half-Light itself, whatever, I can deal with him. All this other crap piled on top is just so messy. I feel bad for players who are forced to play the offline version, as the online one can be fun if you're matched against the right player, but totally imbalanced if not. The kicker of this whole thing is that Half-Light is a fight that's packed in an expansion with unfathomable boss quality, but he unfortunately ruins what could have been a 100% success rate with the bosses in the Ring City DLC. With that out of the way, let's proceed on to Sekiro, which is another title that boasts an extremely high quality of bosses across the board. It has one of the most consistently solid lineups out of all the Soulsborne games. I enjoy a large majority of the fights in this game, from the major bosses all the way down to the lesser mini bosses, though some of those can be a pain because there are multiple instances where the game likes to put a bunch of regular enemies around a mini boss, making those encounters take a lot more time, and they just make it a lot more annoying in general. However, one fight that I cannot stand with my whole being has to be the second Guardian Ape fight. The Guardian Ape already has a moveset that was unconventional to deal with, but felt extremely satisfying to take down. Coming across it again in its headless form felt demoralizing, but then after you take down its first health bar, the fight decides to pull out one of From Software's longest standing cliches of introducing another enemy. Combining a whole other ape with the already frenzied moveset of the headless ape creates a fight where I feel like I'm just about doing whatever the hell I can to survive. The arena is also a lot smaller than when you fought the initial Guardian Ape, with no access to the trees to help you in building space. So let me go through that again. Firstly, it's a reskin of a boss you've already fought. Secondly, it's a gank. And finally, the arena sucks ass with its limited space to withstand two larger enemies. Thankfully, the various shinobi prosthetics are able to assist in providing great support, doing a lot to alleviate the struggle. It makes the fight easier for sure, but returning to it in subsequent playthroughs, as well as replaying it in the gauntlets where they'd end my run a lot of times, is mainly where I got my disdain for it. Some would say skill issue, but in a game with a ton of great bosses with not too many bad ones to choose from, something had to fill this spot. With all the other games done and dusted, that only leaves us with Elden Ring, a game with quite a few bosses out there. I was thinking of choosing from the lineup of over 200, but we all know that the spot would go to one of those shitty catacomb bosses, and there's much more interesting things to talk about. But I'll give a dishonourable mention to that one fight with the Erdtree Burial Watchdog, where they decided to throw in a bunch of imps. That was an absolute trash bag nightmare. It's a fight against an enemy that I'm already uncomfortable with, and they just added those annoying ass imps that can make you bleed really quickly. Doing that on my first playthrough very early on felt like I was put in a torturing device. But as for my true choice for this video, I decided to narrow my list down to mandatory bosses, remembrance bosses, or those required to just progress elsewhere in the game. A lot of people may have put the Godskin duo down in this spot, and understandably so, as it's yet another gank composed of two separate bosses from elsewhere in the game, put into an arena where the fight is really unbalanced, whilst also being mandatory, required to beat the game. And whilst I do dislike this fight a lot, there's another one that irks me a little more than this one, and that's the Valiant Gargoyles. Yet another damn gank. The Valiant Gargoyles are similar to the Godskin duo, in which they take a boss from elsewhere in the game, this time the Blackblade Kindred, and shove them at the end of the Eternal City of Nokron, which in itself was a cool as fuck discovery. Like, you just notice some random jellyfish and continue onwards for a bit to find a boss. It's like, oh hell yeah, come on, let's go. Then you fight it for a bit and you wish you never discovered it because they are obnoxious as fuck. The Blackblade Kindred were one of the toughest field bosses already, essentially being insanely cracked up versions of the Gargoyles in Dark Souls 3. But the Valiant Gargoyles, they thought they were funny, they thought they were cool, and they did the same thing every game's been doing and added one flying down at halfway. Like, come on man, one is enough. Calling them gargoyles too, like you should have just called them the Valiant Man-Eaters instead, as they started this annoying as fuck trend. Trying to withstand the might of two of these guys is really tough. They have wild movesets that can eviscerate health pools with ease. The worst of their attacks are without a doubt their poison breath. They can do shit like this and this for fuck's sake. Adding a poisonous breath attack was so unnecessary and just fuels my hatred for them even more. It ruins all momentum you have, punishing any semblance of aggression, and the fact that you take damage the second you touch the poison makes it all the more worse. The only good thing about this encounter is that the arena is big enough to the point where you can generate enough safety to heal and breathe when needed. need it. But honestly, everything else about this fight is an amalgamation of nonsense and I hate it every time I do it. It also guards your way to the deep root depths, which sucks if you aren't aware of the alternative path below the subterranean shunning grounds. Truly a fight where summoning feels like a preferred method every time. Well, that does it for my thoughts. What do you think? Did you agree with the picks I chose for each game, or perhaps you disagreed with 1 or 2 or even all 7? Let me know in the comments below. It's certainly an interesting topic. I'm genuinely intrigued to see what you guys would have picked for each game. If you made it to the end, thanks for watching and supporting the channel. Be sure to drop a like and even subscribe for more content similar to this, whether it be countdowns, lists like these, or even essay style videos about the Soulsborne games. I have a ton of videos I'm ready to create. Have a great day everybody. I'll see you in the next one, and peace!